Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got Philip Blackett with us today. And he's an author. He's written a book about disagree without disrespect. And this is really going to be useful in today's times. He's also a consultant. He's an entrepreneur. He's got previous experience with FedEx, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Chick-fil-A. He's Harvard trained. He's as well as got degrees from UNC Chapel Hill. I'm really happy to have him on the show. Philip, welcome.
Thanks so much, Christopher. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I really loved today's topic of conversation is how to disagree with others, especially in today's contentious society. Start off by introducing yourself, how you got there, and how the audience can benefit from your expertise.
Yeah, I think that's always a big question to answer. Just going through your life and try to get the tidbits and make sure that people understand why you are who you are. And you did a great job with introductions. I don't even want to follow that, honestly. But I'll at least share with you the meat and potatoes as far as why this particular topic, how to disagree without disrespect, can be advantageous for people in today's society. And I think part of it is when you think about your life, the quality of your life, more times than not, how you measure the quality of your life deals with the quality of your relationships. And so when you think about the quality of your relationships, you think about it in terms of who are the type of people that you feel particularly close to, that you feel like you can be vulnerable and open and honest, the good, the bad, and ugly, and you still feel cared for, you still feel supported and loved, whether it's a love interest, a marriage, a best friend, a father, son, mother, daughter, parent, child relationship, a friend, best friend relationship from college, any of those sort of relationships that stood the test of time, you're going beneath the surface on these type of relationships. And what I would also imagine too is that in these same type of relationships, you more than likely have come across people that you don't see eye to eye on everything with. Probably some things that you actually disagree with, either slightly or very much, yet and still, you're still involved in that relationship with that person. And so the question I have here is that, especially in the society that's as heavily polarized as it is today, what can we honestly learn from those type of relationships that we truly cherish and apply that to our interactions with people that we don't have those type of relationships with? Because there's some common ground there, and of which, if anything, is being able to disagree with people that think, believe, and vote differently from you, and yet and still respect and love that person in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I really love that. And especially today's political climate, I mean, you can see what it's boiled down to. It's boiled down to violence, assassination attempt, just, it's almost dangerous to disagree in public. One of the questions I have for you is especially like one thing is you have these individuals, and it goes both ways. We are part of the problem. They are part of the problem. We contribute both. And what do you do when, for example, you and me are non-white and you have people on one side saying we're the cause, and then we have other people saying they're the cause. And basically how do you, when you disagree on such fundamental issues and they basically have ill will or hate against you, how do you help resolve the problem?
Yeah, so I think part of it, Christopher, is understanding that, listen, I can't control necessarily how somebody feels about me. I can provide who I am and my best foot forward, but I can't guarantee somebody's response or reaction to me. So I at least try to do the best I can in any scenario. And if somebody still wants to blame me or hate me or think I'm the cause for an issue, we can continue conversating and discussing it and help you understand that maybe that's not the case. But at least I know I'm most responsible for what I say and what I do. And I think helping other people have that same sort of, whether it's autonomy or responsibility, I should say, to understand, listen, I can only focus on what I say or do in a conversation. And hopefully I'm sharing a good example of what someone else should do in return, and to understand why that way of interacting with someone is better than how they've been doing it before, so that they might come away from the conversation and say, you know what? I wasn't expecting Christopher to be like that when I talked to him. Said some things that might have got under his skin, may have gotten personal, maybe even played the blame game or that sort. But the way he still responded to me and still acted like he cared for me afterwards, it was different. And I can respect him at least a little bit more because he didn't have to be that way. I was expecting him to be defensive like I would. So I look at it from the sense that what has to happen is similar to how we are as parents or how we hope to have been as kids in relation to our parents. We have to teach one another a better way of going about this, because essentially what's happening is we're swimming upstream to a culture that is essentially glorifying disagreement to the point of taking somebody's life.
Yeah, it's like basically Biden, he went on TV and was like, yeah, we can resolve our differences at the polls or through activism, not through political violence or harming innocent individuals. So there is a, what role does the media have in this? Because, recently there's been a lot of back, for example, today, I'll just give you a personal example is like you have the markets crashing and then you have major news outlets talking about a bear found in the wilderness 10 years ago, just totally irrelevant garbage. And they're basically controlling the narrative. What role is there in this fueling of this contentious environment? How do they play a role?
So I think you've answered your question, Christopher, honestly. How I respond is essentially a question. How do you get your news, Christopher, in terms of how you view the world around you? Right? So if you're hearing that the market is crashing, you're watching some sort of news source that's informing you what's going on and you believe them, right? So once upon a time, when it came to television, we didn't have 300 plus maybe 1,000 channels to watch. Growing up, we might have had maybe 3 or 4 channels. And essentially those 3 or 4 channels all had news programs in the morning, at lunchtime, in the evening news. And those journalist crews had responsibilities that they knew that what they said on television, people would believe them and people would take action on what they said, whether it was whether or not to bring an umbrella to work that morning or whether or not to attend a particular rally with people that you may or may not like. But there was a sense of trust with those people and those sources and those news programs and news teams. Something changed. It's called competition. When 3 or 4 channels now grows to 50 channels, now you got competition among certain news teams that they didn't have. And now a question is, how do I keep people reading my newspapers? How do I keep people watching my news programs? With the internet, how do I get people like Christopher to click on my website link and read what I have to say? So now you got more places where people can get their news, and maybe they want it a certain way or from a certain slant. But what happens essentially is when you're going from 3 to 4 channels to 50 to 100 to 300 plus to who knows how many now, what you essentially have is an all out war on how can I possibly get people to read what I have to view, what I have to show, or listen to what I put out, podcasts, audio, that sort of thing. And so now you start to get in a slippery slope where people start to say, maybe if I stretch the headline a little bit, because I don't want to be boring here. I don't want to stick strictly just to the facts here. Maybe if I stretch it just a little bit, add some fear to it, add some sensationalism to it, maybe a certain image as a thumbnail to get your attention while you're scrolling. Now, all of a sudden, you slowly but surely get people that are not so much reporting information to inform you. They're just trying to get you to click the link. And they don't care as much as far as what they actually share with you. And the problem with that is that If they put so much emphasis on trying to get you on their site and less about the information they're providing to you, the quality of the information you then consume is not going to be as wholesome as it was before. And what happens oftentimes is that when people are likely wanting to get on shows that quickly disagree or demonize or antagonize one particular people or group or have a common enemy, people tend to go for that. And they start to build an echo chamber around themselves saying, I only want to surround myself with people that have this sort of view. So now, all of a sudden, now we got enemies within our own borders, within our own workplaces, within our own families. That's essentially what's happened, where I think a lot of where this polarization got to this nasty and this toxic of a level. I absolutely agree and say that our media, as far as our news media, as well as our social media, had a significant role to play here.
Yeah, I love that response. What you were talking about is the battle for attention, which is now a prized asset. And that's like whoever can control your attention. That's something that's a skill. And then the other thing is, I think recently Putin was saying basically United States is in trouble because the media is tainted. And if you control the sources of information, you control almost propaganda. And which leads me to my next question is this role, because you mentioned social media. And what's interesting is like you go to Twitter or you go to Instagram or YouTube, and it's like these algorithms, they know what you stop, how long you consume it, what your reaction is, and they can feed you the same thing over and over. So if you have something like this disinformation, misinformation, they know it triggers you, it can give you more of that, and that's amplifies it. So what role does artificial intelligence play in all of it? And especially we've got AI algorithms, but now we have generative AI as well, deep fakes. How is that going to contribute to the solution or the problem?
So I think it accelerates whatever good or bad you're trying to do in the world. It's one of those things where it's like the analogy I often use, Christopher, is okay, if you have a butter knife in your kitchen behind you, let's say, you take that knife in your hand and you can do a number of things with it. One, you can butter your bread in the morning for breakfast. Or two, you can use that same knife and kill somebody. The knife is still the same. It hasn't changed its functionality or its appearance. It's just the person that's holding that knife. That's the key variable here. And so I think the same sense with regards to AI is how we ought to look at this as far as, hey, if these social media networks, if their main motive is how do I keep Christopher on my app for 4 hours a day, and I'm learning his behavior and what he's interested in, and I'm using algorithms and all this different technology, and I have people that I hire that monitor this sort and program it in a way to keep giving him what he's looking for to keep him on the app, which will then allow us to get more advertising revenue to support our business and pay our people and enrich ourselves, then we're going to keep doing that. And if we happen to come across a medium like AI, generative or otherwise, that can help further our main mission here, then they would have a vested interest to keep doing that. And so I think that AI is going to be seen as a tool, whether for good or for evil, but it really depends on who's using that tool.
Yeah, interesting. It's very much a tool. And I think is what's going to happen is because basically you had the Mag 7 basically, and they basically came to be regulated, and you had social media, and now AI is this new beast that's you're going to have problems with it. And with each crisis or problem, there's going to be regulations to guardrail against kind of these things. So eventually, really interesting because of this area of disagreement. And so one area talking about what's the first step in this problem. I know you describe it in your book, so talk about your book and how people can find it and learn more about you and engage in the discourse.
Yeah, so I think with regards to the book, Christopher, there's a 5-step framework that I share in it to essentially help people be able to navigate inevitable disagreements with people who think, believe, and vote differently from you. So the first step is essentially to separate the idea or belief from the identity of the believer. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is essentially depending on the person you talk to, the issue at hand, you may come across a topic that person's so intertwined with that it essentially becomes who he or she is. And the challenge with that, Christopher, I would say is that oftentimes when you're critiquing that idea, that person now takes it as you're critiquing him or her. If you are in disagreement with that belief, you now disagree with who that person is. Or take it to a more extreme level, you essentially hate them. And that is enough for somebody to get defensive on, where they can see themselves raising their guard up against you, maybe becoming a little more aggressive towards you to save face, especially if this is in a public setting, or at least to protect their ego and how they see themselves. And that can devolve into name calling and things getting really personal and really nasty very quickly. And you didn't even approach any sense of debating the issue at hand. What essentially has to happen is we have to take a step to set the groundwork, set the framework here that we're essentially talking about the idea or belief at hand. And we're not necessarily coming after the person who believes it.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that, separating the the belief and the idea from the person. Yeah, really interesting. And how can people find out more about you and find out more about the work that you do and check out your book?
Yeah. So a great place to go find my book, Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate with Those Who Think, Believe, and Vote Differently from You, is on Amazon. So you can definitely look it up by its book title, or if it's a little long, might be hard to remember, you could just look it up by my name, Philip Blackett, Philip Blackett. There you'll see that book along with some other books I've written, and to figure out which ones make the most sense for you to start reading.
Excellent. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Really, it reminds me of a documentary I saw at South by Southwest talking about misinformation and disinformation. And so, all the audience, be sure to check out Philip's book on Amazon, follow his socials, give him a, and with that, thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely, Christopher.